Stephenson, a dangerous man who knows a lot about technology, who has successfully integrated learning at the highest levels for companies like Goldman Sachs and JetBlue. And the first question I'm going to posit to my friend is, what is it and why is everything alive?
Well, I'll try and moderate the dangerousness just for the sake of everybody's common safety. To say everything is alive is a kind of both a reality and a metaphor. So let's look at the metaphor part first. Yeah, you should probably kill that.
I think I better put this bad boy.
Otherwise, Jimi Hendrix will join us. In the sense of metaphor, what we're talking about, and we're talking about just a couple of years. We're not talking Bob's 2037 apocalypse or anything like that.
It's not apocalypse, come on.
To say everything is alive is to say that all the objects in the physical world know about themselves. They know what their history is and what their relationships to the rest of the world are. They know who is around them, and they know who's talking to them. And if you think about what characterizes human beings, what Bob and I are doing here, we will be having those kinds of conversations with all the devices around us. So if you think about when you go in an audio tour in a museum right now, you can walk by paintings and you will hear about the painting and the artist and the style with which it's a part of and the like. But imagine that situation in which you can go up to any object and say, tell me about yourself. And the object will then tell you what it is, who made it, where it came from, what its purpose is, how it's related to the objects around us. In order to have that happen, you think about some of the things that Bob described as kind of short-term trends. Computers get so small that you can stick them onto anything. They live in connectivity the way we breathe air. They use that air in the way that we use sound waves to talk to each other, except that they're talking to each other and they're talking to us because they know who we are in the same way. So it's both metaphoric and reality. We are a few years away from being able to do that in relatively restricted domains, but there's nothing about technology that changes the general trend that that's going on.
Well, the biggest question that I have is when you talk about self-aware, and you talk about the ability of how these objects can communicate with another, I think of the idea of how do you herd cats? Because we're talking about these types of objects that have an awareness of what they are. How do we manage this when we're trying to teach a course? Let's say we want to teach algebra, we want to teach physics. How do you relate that? And how do you pull these things together when you have this type of ongoing conversation that is with us and yet separate from us?
Yeah. Well, the objects know who we are.
Right.
And we are carrying with us a lot of personal information. So they will know what I'm interested in. They won't talk to me unless I ask them to, unlike cell phones, as we all know. They wake up in the middle of the night and wake us up. But so we will be as much a part of that soup, if you will, as the objects themselves. And we carry our own agendas with us. Yes. We have our interests. We have our needs. And the ability with all this processing power and communications power allows us to manage all of that information.
Okay.
So if you think of the way the internet has evolved, I'm an English major, formally, which of course qualifies me for a job in learning technologies. So I like to use literary metaphors.
Right.
So there's essentially 3 generations of the way we think about the internet. The first one was built in about 1988 by an author named William Gibson.
Yep.
And he coined the term cyberspace. And in Gibson's novels, cyberspace is an abstract representation of this fuzzy world of data. Right. And we have to have visual artists interpret it for us because it has no grounding in reality.
Right, right.
Second generation comes in about the late 90s.
Yeah.
It's a guy named Neil Stephenson,
Yep.
a novel called Snow Crash. Anybody who knows about Second Life? Who's heard Second Life, looked at Second Life? Okay. Second Life is essentially the physical representation of what Neil Stephenson was talking about in Snow Crash. It is a mimic of the reality that we know. So that, if you will, that's Internet 2.0. What is rapidly coming on us is the third generation of the internet, in which the internet is essentially overlaid on the physical world. So with things like global positioning satellites and the kinds of connectivity and devices that we were talking about when everything is alive,
Yep.
we essentially have two realities that we can inhabit. We can inhabit physical reality, we can inhabit the data-based reality, and we can manipulate those two back and forth
Yep.
at will. Simple example, I'm now working in the aviation industry. Pilots for years have had what are called heads-up displays, and those displays overlay data on the physical world. But they're in a very, very restricted environment. They're in a cockpit, you know what airport you're coming into, all that. We will increasingly be able to live in that world in which we overlay information about the various connections that are going on around us. That changes the way we interact with the world in ultimately quite radical ways.